The Secret of Emu Plain by L.T. Meade and Robert Eustance, authors of A Master of Mysteries. It so happened that business called me to Queensland in the late October of 1894, and hearing that my old friend Rosamond Dale was about to be married, I determined to present myself at Jim McDonald's station on the Barcoo district in December, in order to be present at the ceremony. I had seen a good deal of Rosamond when she was a child, and it was an old promise of mine that, if possible, I was to be one of her guests at the wedding. I arrived at McDonald's a week before Christmas, and when a hot wind or sirocco was blowing through in the west, a little thought, as I did so, that the strangest and most terrible adventures of my life was about to take place in the Queensland bush. But so it was, and this is the story just as it happened. I had been delayed on my journey, and on the evening of my arrival the wedding was to take place. McDonald's property was about 750 square miles in extent, and was in the heart of the hills, which are the fountainhead of the countless creeks and run south to form the Warrego and eventually the Great Darling River, some 400 miles away. It was a good grazing country on the whole, but contained one enormous tract of arid sand, some 40 square miles in extent, which went in the same name, the Emu Plain. Skirting one corner of this plain ran a coach road from Blackall to Charleville, and along ran Cobb and Co.'s coach once a fortnight. Almost in the middle of the plain stood a solitary grandeur of the great Emu Rock, a grotesque, bare, perpendicular crag of limestone slicing the sheer 300 feet above the ground. Leaving my heavy luggage in Blackall, I had come with advice by Cobb and Co.'s coach to the crossroads, and had then ridden over to McDonald's house in a low wooden homestead in a one-story, with a veranda running all around it. The sitting rooms opened into the veranda. There was a garden at the back, enclosed by a fence. McDonald met me with the words of a wholesome welcome. "You're late, Belle," he exclaimed. "Rosamond has been waiting impatiently for your arrival all day. She never forgets how good you were to her when she was a child, and all alone in the old country. But let me take you to her room for a tub and a brush-up, and she would like to see you for a moment or two before the wedding." Jim took me to my apartment, the left wing of their house, and half an hour later I joined Rosamond Dale on the balcony. She was a handsome, dark-eyed girl with a bright, vivacious face and sparkling eyes. She had changed much in her appearance since I had last seen her, as a small and somewhat awkward schoolgirl, but her affectionate heart and her frank manners were still abundantly manifest. She made me seat myself in a deck chair, and began at once to talk about her bridegroom. Goodwin was the best man in the world. She loved him with all her heart and soul, and she liked the life in the bush too. Notwithstanding its loneliness, there was an element of excitement about it which quite suited her nature. As she spoke to me, I noticed that she looked anxiously out, and shading her eyes with her hand, I saw them travel across a paddock and up the road. "What's the matter, Rosamond?" I said at last. "And by the way," I added, "won't you introduce me to Mr. Goodwin?" "He has not come yet. I cannot understand it," replied the girl. "He ought to have been here an hour ago. His station is just about 30 miles from here, just across Emu Plain." "What a hideous piece of desolation that Emu Plain is," I answered. "I skirted in the coach and never saw anything so repulsive in my life." I noticed that Rosamond shuddered, and her face turned pale. "It is an ugly place," she said at last, "and bears a bad name." "What do you mean by that?" I answered. "You will laugh at me, Mr. Bell," was her reply, "but people in that plain is haunted. Some most extraordinary disappearances have taken place from that time to time. If Frank came across the plain, there is no saying, but—" She looked me full in the face. "I'm surely frightening myself for nothing," she said. But will you excuse me a moment? I must go to the drawing room and ask if there's any news from Frank. She rose and I followed her into the room behind the veranda. I there, for the first time, made Mrs. McDonald's acquaintance. She was a hearty, good-natured looking woman, with eyes like Rosamond's. She seemed devotedly attached to her niece, and now went up to the girl and kissed her affectionately. Your uncle has just gone off to meet Frank, she said. They're sure to be here in a few moments. She spoke cheerfully, but I felt certain I noticed the veiled anxiety in her eyes. At that moment, a man crossed the room and came up to Rosamond and held out his hand. How do you do, Mr. Corey? Said the girl gravely. She had beautiful dark eyes with magnificent lashes, as I observed, as Corey spoke to her, and she lowered them and avoided looking at him. He was a tall, thin man with red hair and a slight cast in one eye. His lips were thin, the thinnest I had ever seen, and the expression, joined to the cast in the eye, gave him a sinister look. He was on good terms, however, with all the guests, and had the manners of a gentleman. Rosamond returned to the veranda, and I followed her. Are you really nervous about anything? I said. Is it possible that you apprehend that an accident has happened to Goodwin? How can I tell? She answered, and now looked agony across her strong face. He ought to be here before now. He has never failed before. And on the wedding evening, too. The plane is haunted, you know, Mr. Bell. Don't laugh at me when I say that. I believe the Ghost of Emu Plain. You must tell me more, I answered. You know, I continued with a smile, that I am interested in ghosts. She could not return my smile. Her face grew wider and wider. And who is that man Corey? I said after a pause. Oh, never mind about him, she answered impatiently. He has a selection about 20 miles from here, and is, I believe, an Englishman. I cannot think what is keeping Frank, she added. Oh, thank God, I hear horses' roofs at last. She ran to the farther end of the veranda and stood there, gazing up the road in the most longing, perplexed expression I had ever seen on a human face. Alas, only one rider was returning, and that was MacDonald himself. He came in cheerfully, and Frank might appear at any moment, and suggested we all go to supper. At that meal, I noticed Rosamond almost played with her food. She was seated near Mr. Lee, the clergyman from the nearest township, who had come over to marry her. He talked to her in low tones, and she replied listlessly. It was evident that her thoughts were on her absent lover, and that she could not think of anything else. At last the miserable meal had dragged to an end, and the evening passed away somehow, and different guests retired to their rooms. By and by, MacDonald and I found ourselves alone. Now what is up? I said, going to him at once. Jim, what is the meaning of this? God only knows, was his reply. I don't like it, though, and that's a fact. You notice the big plane you came along by the coach? Emu Plain, I replied. Jim nodded. It bears an ugly reputation, he said. There have been the most extraordinary disappearances there from time to time. The blacks say the place is haunted by a ghost, which they call the bunyip. Of course, I don't believe in anything of that sort, but it is a fact that a man can scarcely get a black man to cross the plain after dark. 2 or 3 of our settlers have entered the plain alone, and never been heard since. Whether the agency which causes them to disappear is ghostly or otherwise, it is impossible for me to say. You surely don't believe in the bunyip, I said with a slight laugh. Oh, she answered. The fact is this, Bell, old man, I cannot laugh over the matter. If anything has happened to Goodwin, I believe he... Hello, what can this be? Lie down, boy. He added Jim to help, his big collie. We went out into the paddock, and as we did so, a man rode quickly up to him, and Jim recognized as one of the mounted police. What's up, Jack? Said Jim. The traveler riding alone in the black hole said he got bushed by the rangers, was the man's reply. I heard Frank Goodwin has not turned up yet, and it occurred to me that I ought to know at once. The man's horse, with an empty saddle, was found under a boundary fence. It is possible he had an accident. Could you let me have Bill, your black tracker? Poor chap may be limping and cannot move along the ranges. This is not a moment to lose. Good God, then it must be Godwin, exclaimed Jim. We won't tell Rosalind yet. We will bring Billy and go with you at once, Jack, he continued. You will come along too, won't you, Bill? He added briskly. Anything is better than suspense. I'll get the horses up and we will start out in a moment, though we won't be able to do much before daylight. In a quarter of an hour, we set out. Billy, the black tracker, looked sulky and was also considerably alarmed. Jim whispered to me that he had great difficulty in making him come at all. He believes in the bunyip, he added, dropping his voice low to a hoarse whisper. Billy himself was an ill-favored-looking creature, but as a tracker he was possessed of almost superhuman powers, and was noted all the district as one who could follow any tracks of almost any kind. He had only one eye, the other having been knocked out by a scrimmage, and with that eye he could read the ground, and an uncivilized man reads a book. We started off slowly. Billy was presently enthused by the ride ahead. He sucked his pipe as he took no interest in the affair. Well, we must be somewhere on the ranges, said MacDonald emphatically. But how he got off track beats me. He knows every yard of the place. There's a foul place somewhere. Just as he said the last words, Billy turned in the saddle, cocking one eye round, and said slowly, Ghost of Emu Plain night time. Bunyip here. Nonsense, Billy, replied MacDonald almost angrily. There's no such thing as a bunyip. You know that well as I do. I see a bunyip once in the Emu Plain along rock. What went on? I make tracks, my word. Just as the day broke, our way led out of the scrub, and the trees began to get once more sparsely scattered, till we suddenly burst upon the borders of the great plain itself. A few moments towards, Billy uttered a cry and picked up the tracks. With his one eye he fixed on the ground, he dismounted and began to examine some bent grass and disturbed stones. To my unaccustomed vision, the signs that guided him were absolutely invisible, but it was an exhibition of instinct that no one would believe without seeing it. On and on we went through the heat, silent and expectant, now up, now down, now over ridge and gully. Suddenly Bill uttered a sharp cry, and leaping from his horse, gave me the reins and walked round and around, peering about and grunting to himself. At last, looking up, he exclaimed, Man met someone here. Met someone? cried MacDonald. Are you sure, Billy? Quite sure, was the answer. He took his tomahawk and cut a notch in one of the trees in order to mark the spot. Then remounted and rode on. The moment Billy spoke again. More horses, my word, he said. Look. The marks were clear enough now, even to us. In a piece of soft ground there were hoof marks of 3 horses. Billy said no more, and put his horse in a canter. We followed him. About a mile further we pulled up to the edge of the scrub. We were now close to the great Emu Rock. I noticed at once the number of crows were wheeling around its summit. Well, is it strange, said Jim, speaking in a hoarse voice, but I never come near this great rock like that I don't see crows whirling around the top. There they go as usual, he added, clutching my arm. My God, whenever a man disappears, there are marks of struggle at the foot of the rock. Watch Billy now, he will know in a moment. Oh, merciful heaven, it is true then that something has happened to Goodwin. Poor Rosamond, this will break her heart. Yes, there are marks. Billy notices them. Now, Bill, you never had a greater mystery than this to solve. Marks at the foot of the rock. A man disappears, never found again. What does it mean, Bill? Where does he go? There must be a devilry in the matter. Bill dismounted and was bending over the ground. Suddenly he uttered a sharp squirrel cry. The marks! The marks! He gasped. Bunyip here! Man here! Devil taken! See! His intense excitement communicated itself to us. He began to run about, peering down low over the ground. See! He repeated. They get off here. Go that way. Spur come off. His quick eye had caught the glitter. He picked up the slum spur. Yes, it is as it always is. 3 men fight, 2 men go away. 1 man, where you go? Double taken. He pointed to the sky, gazing up, showing his white teeth in horror. Nonsense, Billy, said MacDonald in a voice which tried to render it commonplace but assured. I looked at him and saw he was shaking from head to foot. Come away, he said to me. Poor girl, poor Rosamond. Billy, he added abruptly, turning to a tracker, we must pick up the tracks of these horses. We mounted and followed the horse tracks again. We ran up the tracks back to the coach road, and then lost them on the confusion of a mob of cattle that had passed during the morning. Well, this is a bad business, said MacDonald. Goodwin is missing, and what took place in the plain by the rock, and how he disappeared from the face of the earth, and who are the men who had a hand in it? Unsolvable problems. It is not the first time, Bell, that the horror of this thing. I tell you, I don't like the business at all. It looks uncommonly like another of those queer disappearances. Tell me about them, I said suddenly. He began to talk, lowering his voice to a whisper. A year ago, a man was lost in the Emu Plain. He was a young fellow, an Englishman, and heir to a big property. He was seen to cross the plain on horseback one afternoon, and he was never heard or seen of again. And there were the marks of a struggle by the great rock, just as we saw them today, Bill. His people have spent thousands trying to discover the mystery, but all in vain. Since then, the neighborhood and the rock has been avoided, and the horror of the plain has grown in the minds of everybody. For this disappearance was not the first. Others have preceded it. From time to time, at longer or shorter intervals, a man entered the desolate plain, and never, as far as any human being could tell, left it again. What does that thing pretend? Billy kept honking, Bunyip! Bunyip! At last MacDonald shouted to him that he would break his head if he said the word one more time. We returned to the station. Rosamond, with a face like death, came out to meet us. You must bear up, my dear, said her uncle. Any news? She asked. Well, there were tracks of struggle on the plain, he said with evident reluctance, but we cannot follow them. A mob of cattle passed up the road this morning and it confused the tracks. Where was the struggle? She said in a low voice. MacDonald avoided her eyes, and she gave him a direct and piercing glance. Come on the Miranda, Uncle Jim. And you too, Mr. Bell, and tell me everything, said the girl, whose voice was quiet and had a strange stillness about it. We followed her without a word. She drew deck chairs forward and entered the cool veranda, and then kneeling by the side, she laid her hand on my shoulder. Now, she said, facing MacDonald, tell me all. Where was the struggle? Rosamond, you must bear up. It was in the old spot at the foot of the great rock. There, my girl. He hastily added, rising up as he spoke. I don't give up hope yet. I will send Jack immediately and have the affair telegraphed all over the country. He left the veranda, walking slowly. Rosamond turned to me. My fears are certainties, she said. And Frank has disappeared just as the other men have disappeared, but oh my God, she said, rising hastily to her feet. I will find him. I will. If he is alive, I will find him, and you, Mr. Bell, must help me. You have solved mysteries before, but never so great as this one. You will help me, will you not? With all my heart, my child, I answered. There's not one moment to lose. Let us go at once. No, Rosamond, that would be madness, I said. If Goodwin is alive, the police will get tidings of him, and if not... My voice fell. Rosamond looked at me intently. Do you think I can rest so? She said. If you do not want to drive me mad, something must be done immediately. Then what do you propose? I asked, looking at her. Go back with you to the plain to examine those marks myself, to bring my woman's wit and intuition to bear in the matter. Where men fail, many to discover the cause a woman may succeed. You know I am right. And I would take you with me gladly if it were possible, but it is not. Do you think anything that is impossible for a man is impossible for a woman? She said. We can take some food with us and start at once. We won't consult anyone. If we're quick, we can reach the rock in an hour or two before sunset. I know the whole ghastly place as well as we can return by moonlight. So don't oppose me, she added. For if you do, I will start alone. Anything is better than inaction. I did not say a word. She gave me a quick, grateful glance and left the veranda. Half an hour later, she appeared in the paddock, equipped with a stout habit and mounted on a splendid black horse. She led another by a bridle for me, and we started off at once. We reached the great rock by daylight. The sweltering sun beat down upon our heads, and the arid sand rose in clouds around us, but Rosamond neither faltered nor complained. A spirit burnt within her which no obstacle could daunt. There were marks on the struggle plainly visible. Rosalind knelt on the ground and examined them as close and with a keen eye as even Billy the Black Tracker himself. We walked around and round the rocks, and crows circled over our heads, making hideous noises as they did. But, search as we would, we could not find any clue beyond the very manifest one, that were the three that had fought and struggled, and only two had gone away. What in the name of heaven had become the third? Before sunset, Rosamond put her hand in mine. "Take me home," she said faintly. I did so. We neither of us spoke on that desolate return journey. Again the next day we visited the rock and made a careful search, and the next day, and the next. Meanwhile the country rang with the disappearance of Frank Goodwin, and with news of Rosamond's grief. No clue could we obtain anywhere. We could not get the faintest tidings of a missing man. That it was Goodwin's horse which was found in the boundary fence was beyond doubt. It had started from the station in very good time, and on the fatal morning, and in the best of health and spirits. But from that moment it had not been seen. I stayed with the MacDonalds for over a fortnight, and then, whilst as I was to leave Rosamond in her trouble, I had to take my departure, owing to some pressing business in Brisbane, but I promised to return again as soon as I could. My plan was to ride from my first stage to Corey's Select. Billy would come with me and bring back the horse I was riding. I would then wait for the coach to pick me up. I arrived at Corey's in good time and sent Billy back with my horse, and as there were still some hours before Cobb's coach would pass, it suddenly occurred to me that I could once go again to Emu Rock and exert every faculty I possessed to discover the mystery. Corey and the two friends who lived with him, Englishmen of much his own build and make, were out. I told Corey's black servants that I was going to try and bag a plain turkey, and borrowed one of the guns for that purpose. In about an hour I reached the rock. The sun was already dipping low over the hills. Across the summit of the rock, crows and eagle-hawks wheeled to and fro. I walked around and around it in despair. I longed to tear its ghastly secret out of the silent rock. What strange scene had it not, and in all probability, recently witnessed? By and by I sat down at the base of the rock, and watched the shadow creeping across the plain as the sun sank lower and lower. I was just making up my mind to return to Corey's when suddenly, within a few yards of me, I saw something drop on the sand. It made no noise, but it fell and caught my eye. Wondering vaguely what it might be, I got up and sauntered over to the place. I saw something on the ground. It was an odd-looking thing. I bent down to see what it was. As I did, my heart stood still. I was looking at a human finger. The flesh was nearly all picked to the bone. I took it in my hand and gazed at it. My pulses were throbbing, and a deadly fear seized me. Where had it come from? What did it mean? And then in an instant a wild thought struck me. I looked up. Still flying to and fro noisily were the crows and the hawks. One of them had dropped the bloody finger. It was the body of Frank Goodwin at the top of Emu Rock. The idea was monstrous, and yet there was a finger, and the crows wheeling around and around above me. But how could I prove my ghastly suspicion? By no earthly means would it be possible to scale 300 feet of perpendicular rock. If the body of poor Goodwin was up there, how in the name of all that was mysterious had it been put up there? One thing, at least, was certain. I must go back at once to McDonald Station and report the horrible discovery I had made, and arrange for an investigation of the summit of the rock to take place immediately. The sirocco was still blowing hard, and the great eddies of sand were circling the air. A sandstorm was evidently coming on, but there was nothing for me to do but lie down and bury my face in the ground until it passed by. I did so, my pulses throbbing, the most nameless fear and depression stealing over me. The storm grew greater, and it was upon me. I kept my eyes shut, my face buried. All of a sudden, from what quarter I knew not, there came a dizzy pain. Lights danced before my eyes. I seemed to sink into nothingness. My terrors were lifted from me. I was enshadowed in the impregnable darkness, and I remembered no more. When I came to myself, I was lying on my back and gazing up at the stars. Everything around me was as silent as the grave, except the noise of the wind through the scrub brush, which, curiously enough, now sounded far below me. I was lying on hard rock, and every bone in my body ached. I managed to turn myself slowly around and then gazed about me. Where in the name of heaven was I? I saw that I was lying in some sort of basin of rock, at the edge of which some 10 feet above me. But what was the dark mass lying a little to my left? I managed to crawl towards it. Great heavens! It was a human body! The moment I saw it, my memory returned. I knew my last conscious thoughts had been, I was in the midst of a sandstorm at the foot of the great Emu rock. Darkness, drawn too heavy to pain, had overtaken me. When I came to myself, I was at the top of Emu Rock with my body beside me. It was doubtless that of Frank Goodwin. By what supernatural agency was I transported here? For a moment my brain reeled, and I thought I might be the victim of some hideous nightmare. The moon was riding high in the heavens, and the sandstorm had completely passed, and the stars were bright. In this subdued light, I could see every object around me almost as vividly as if it were day. I gazed once again at the body of the man by my side. Suddenly my heart leapt with fresh fear. I raised myself on my elbow and thought I saw the body stir. Could it still be alive? No, yet. It was as if it was poised above the shoulder. Something was moving. Black, a smooth object which swayed gently to and fro with a horrible, perfect regularity. The silence was suddenly broken by a long, low hiss, and I perceived that the coils of the enormous snake heaved and rolled as the loathsome creature slowly unwound itself and glided noiselessly up the side of the rock. Drops of sweat broke out upon my forehead, and for fully an hour I lay still, literally paralyzed with fear. Then the mad courage of desperation seized me, and with reckless disregard for danger from the reptile, I sprang back to the edge of the rock. But as I did, I knew all the time that a pair of glistening eyes had fixed upon me. Never for a moment did they blink or withdraw their gaze. Single-handed, unarmed, in a prison from which escape was impossible, I was face to face with this deadly reptile. For all I knew, there might be many others close beside me among the rocks. The dawn began slowly to break. The light grew stronger every moment, as I crouched on one side of my prison, tense and motionless. I knew that, if I stirred, the reptile would spring upon me. It was coiled up now on the rock exactly opposite the spot where the body of Frank Godwin lay. Once I ventured to turn my eyes and look around. 300 feet below stretched the plain. Yes, escape was impossible. Now I had to face either a quick death from the bite of a huge brown snake, or a lingering death from thirst and starvation. Just for a moment, I nearly yielded to a sudden impulse that assailed me, to take one step back over the edge of the basin and end my sufferings instantaneously. But, sick and faint as I still was, I determined to have one last fight before I destroyed myself. Cautiously, and still keeping my eyes upon the brute, I loosened a large flat stone weighing a couple of pounds, and gently and slowly, for all with those eyes which never blinked were fixed upon me, I unfastened my leather belt and made a loop with one end through the buckle. Then, slipping it on the stone, I drew the snap tightly around the stone. Here was an improv weapon, a good one if I chanced to have a first blow. Wrapping the end of the belt twice around my hand, I crept slowly forward across the body of the dead man. And as I did so, the great snake moved to and fro, opening its jaws, and hissed at me in fury. I knew now, in a moment, he would spring. I held up my hand, keeping the strap with the stone at the end well behind me. and then with all the force swung it around my shoulder at the brute. At the same instant, with incredible swiftness, it struck out sideways at me. The huge stone met it halfway, and it fell, with its back broken, at my feet, hissing and wriggling in hideous contortions. I sprang back and once more swinging the stone with all my force, crushed it against its head on the rock. In another moment, I had flung it over and was watching its great body whirling down through the air to the plain below. The immediate danger passed, and I now began, as cool as I could calculate my own chances. It was impossible to say when the news of my disappearance might reach Jim McDonald's station. Perhaps not for weeks. Meanwhile, what was to become of me? If there were more brown snakes lurking between the crevices of the rock, I must, at best, slowly die of thirst and starvation. Surely by superhuman agency had I transported by a giddy eminence, but escape was absolutely impossible. Poor Rosamond. I had at last succeeded in my quest, and Goodwin's mangled body lay close to me. Was I to share a similar fate? As the hopelessness of the situation came upon me, I trembled. The sun was now well up, and I knew that my sufferings from heat and thirst were all too soon to begin. I removed my shirt, and tearing it into strips, fastened them together, then attached the free end to a projection of the rock. Then I flung the body of poor Goodwin onto the plain below. As I did so, the grim idea of ending my sufferings by suicide recurred to me once more. If no help came, I would, when my pains became intolerable, fling myself from some dizzying height. I sat down on the huge stone and looked out towards the coach road. The hours dragged wearily on, but no sign of human life did I see. The blazing sun beat mercilessly down upon my head, and by midday the pangs of thirst had almost arisen to torture, and hunger also now assailed me. I was faint, and giddy too, and discovered that I was suffering from a severe blow to the head. Doubtless I had received this blow at the foot of the rock, and it was rendered me unconscious, and the mysterious agency which had lifted me to the height above was then brought into requisition. Were they indeed ghostly hands by which had dealt me this blow? Was the bunyip a real devil? Was Emu Plain haunted by a horror which admittedly had no solution? From time to time I shouted insanely in order to keep off the eaglehawks and crows which swooped down and wheeled around me. More than once I rose and peered down over the edge of my awful prison. There was not the slightest ledge or projection from the smooth sides for more than 100 feet. Escape was out of the question. My weakness was increasing, hour by hour, and I resolved that if relief did not come before the sun set tomorrow, I would take that desperate leap and end my sufferings. I dared not sleep lest I would miss the frail chance of anyone coming, and the whole long night I paced around, shouting at intervals, while my voice became hoarse and thick from my parched lips. As morning broke once more, I was utterly exhausted and lay down. Now half delirious from raging fever, my head felt as if it would burst, and the great rock seemed to reel and totter beneath me. The hours went by, and I know not how. Time seemed nowhere. Reality had merged into ghostly phantasmagoria. Hunger and thirst grew greater and greater. Insensibly, and scarcely knowing why I did it, I crept to the edge of that terrible cup in the rock. I could stand my tortures no longer. Instantaneous death would end my sufferings. I gazed round with haggard eyes for my last look at earth, and suddenly a shrill shout rent the air. I reeled back and clung to the corner of the rocks for support. Once again came the noise. I heard my name, followed immediately by the report of a gun. The next instant I saw, lying across the cup of the rock close to me, a thin piece of cord. "Catch it and haul in!" I heard the drawn voice through a telephone from below. I leapt up, and hope had returned, when delirium fell from me like a mantle. For the time myself was once more. I obeyed the words from below and began frantically to haul in the rope. Coil after coil came up thicker and thicker, till presently I held in my hands a stout rope. I now mustered all my remaining strength and fastened the rope tightly around the neck of a piece of solid rock. After doing this, I remembered nothing more. They told me afterwards, long weeks afterwards, when my fever had left me, and weak as a child, I submitted to Rosamond's ministrations, It told me then, in my room at Jim McDonald Station, what had really occurred. Rosamond had the strangest dream of her life. She'd gone through overmastering terror. Horror beyond description had visited her. She had dreamt that I was on top of Emu Rock and insisted on going there, accompanied by Jim, Billy, the Black Tracker. At the base of his mighty rock, Evidence was the most terrible character met her eyes, but brave girl as she was, she turned her attention to the rescue of the living. A cord was sent up to my dizzying immense by means of a rocket gun, and then I had fastened the rope to the rock. Billy himself had come up and brought me down. Thus I was saved from the very jaws of death. But what the mystery was, and how Frank Goodwin's body had been hauled up to the top of Emu Rock, and how I myself got there, are insoluble mysteries. I have unearthed more than one ghost in my day, but the great Bunyip of Emu Plain has baffled my ingenuity. He has won in the fight, and I bow my head in silence, owing that he, in his unfathomable mystery, is stronger than I. This was apparently part of a competition. A mystery competition open to all the readers of the above story. This exceedingly clever story is a sequel to the adventures of John Bell, the Ghost Exposer, related for us by Mrs. Meade last year under the title of Master of Mysteries. Some of our readers will remember that Mrs. Meade spoke then of one mystery which John Bell had not been able to fathom. Above the story of the Emu Plain is the mystery in question, that which John Bell could not explain, however known to the authors of the adventure. We suggest that our readers attempt to solve the mystery themselves, and they will be awarded 10 prizes of 1 guinea each, 10 solutions which, in Mrs. Meade's opinion, are the best sent to us. These solutions are marked Story Prize, and to be addressed to the editor of Castle's Magazine, Lavelle Savage's London, E.C. Must reach us before the deadline of February 15th. We shall publish Miss Meade's explanation of the mystery in our April number. No person may send more than one solution of the story, and no solution must exceed 300 words in length. Now the actual answer. Before leaving the old country for Australia, Corey, who was a clever mechanician, had engaged a long time of investigating the possible uses of kites for military operations, and had made a large number of very interesting experiments to their lifting power. He found, and his results correctly responded to those of other investigators, that a fairly strong wind, 1 square foot of kite, would rise itself half a pound. He found also that to obviate the inconvenience of using a large and unwieldy kite for raising heavy weights, a series of small kites attached vertically one above the other answered the purpose equally well. And by this means he succeeded in raising weights up to 200 pounds by attaching them to the ground rope about 6 feet from the lowest of the kites and employing a horse to draw the rope. By this means of slip rope arrangement, an enormous explosive charge could be raised and dropped over an enemy's fortification with considerable accuracy. 3 kites each, 10 square feet, raising 11 stone. Hereditarily tainted with criminal instincts, coupled with a fantastic imagination, the particular construction of the Emu Rock suggested to him by means of kites the body of a man could be raised and deposited on top where it could never be found by any discoverers. An opportunity for practically putting this diabolical scheme to the test soon occurred. So long as the sirocco was blowing, the feat was comparatively easy. The manner in which John Bell became one of his victims is already known.